Imagine a world without rules, without police, laws, government, a world without morality or religion. Imagine a life without guilt, obligations, coercion, or pressure. Imagine all those people living for today. For 17th century political theorist Thomas Hobbes, such a world would be a nightmare. He believed that individuals, pursuing their own desires, without an external authority, would be at each other's throats. A world where people pursued their own interests, where all those people just lived for today, would be a world of violence and war, a brutal and continual war of all against all. In his most famous book, Leviathan, Hobbes writes, "In such condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death in the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short." Hobbes argued that human beings find this natural state, or state of nature, so unbearably nasty and brutish and short that they bind themselves to each other and create government. They establish a shared authority, an awe-inspiring Leviathan that can articulate law and enforce punishments. And it's thanks to this Leviathan that we can live together and pursue our desires without descending into bloody conflict. In this video, I will explain how Hobbes saw his political project as part of a larger scientific revolution, like his contemporaries who sought to redefine physics, chemistry, astronomy, and biology. Hobbes sought to replace ancient learning with a new science of politics. Now, the idea of the state of nature as a state without government might not sound so revolutionary to you, but almost everyone in Hobbes's day followed Aristotle in assuming that human beings are by their very nature political animals. To imagine a human without polity is like imagining a bee without a hive, or a wolf without a pack. And being naturally in community also meant having a natural place within a natural hierarchy. Some people are born to be leaders, some to be followers, and others born to serve. Hobbes's new science of politics shook that all up. He rejected the assumption that human beings are naturally in community and naturally in hierarchies. He proposed the radical idea that government and hierarchies are unnatural. They're artificial, or we might say constructed. And here's the thing, if they are constructed, they can be deconstructed and reconstructed. Early on, Hobbes worked for one of the granddaddies of the scientific revolution, Francis Bacon, as an amanuensis or secretary. Bacon taught that knowledge is power. That is, science can help us harness the forces of nature to alleviate human suffering and bring about lasting peace. Now, Hobbes saw himself as part of this large scientific project. He was dazzled by Galileo, corresponded with Descartes, wrote to and argued with dozens of contemporary philosophers and scientists. For Hobbes, the epitome of rational scientific clarity was the geometric proof. The problem with politics is that people simply assert their immediate interests instead of stepping back and thinking logically, step by step, about their long-term goals and how to achieve them. By starting with clear axioms, then constructing logical arguments based on those axioms, Hobbes believed that he could arrive at conclusions that every fair-minded person would recognize. He could replace political quarrels with public reason, which would in turn guarantee a lasting and permanent peace. Now, Hobbes begins his argument by focusing on the units that make up the polity, human beings. He sidesteps earlier ethical and theological debates over the true function and purpose of human beings by insisting that science can only study matter and motion. So a scientific understanding of humans must treat them as material beings who move through a material world. Hobbes says that we are driven by desire, and this desire generates two bodily motions: appetite, which propels us towards something, and aversion, which propels us away. It is desire that propels our material bodies into action. Although we are first and foremost driven by our desires, Hobbes also thinks we have a faculty of reason or reckoning, which is a capacity to signify things through language, but also to think about logical connections, that is, causes and effects. We're capable of reasoning about how best to fulfill our appetites and avoid our aversions. Now this leads us back to the state of nature. Remember, Hobbes starts by insisting that there's a fundamental equality between people in the state of nature. Now, this is a radical claim based on his materialist assumptions. Since every individual is simply matter in motion, and since every individual is driven by similar desires, there's no basis for claiming natural distinctions between people. In Hobbes' state of nature, all individuals are driven by their appetites and aversions. It's important to remember that Hobbes does not think that people are evil. He does not think that we want to do harm to others intentionally. In fact, he assumes that we rationally seek peace because it's through peace that we can best pursue our desires and avoid our greatest aversion, death. But here is the great puzzle that Hobbes uncovers. Although it's in our interest, although it's logical to seek peace and live in harmony with each other, in the absence of a legal authority to maintain order, it's also reasonable to do whatever we have to do to protect ourselves, including appealing to violence. We rationally desire peace in the long term, but we reasonably resort to violence in the short term. Hobbes explains how in the state of nature, our individual reason seems to be in conflict with our collective rationality. Now, Hobbes wrestles with these issues in a tricky section of Leviathan, where he distinguishes between natural right and natural law. Hobbes argues that natural right is the right to preserve ourselves, the capacity to use any means necessary to defend our lives. Now, this is a subjective natural right, based in our will and judgment of what we think is necessary. Natural law is distinct from natural right, yet it is also diverges from an older tradition of thinking that defines natural law as some sort of objective moral standard, an innate moral standard that could be recognized by our conscience. For Hobbes, natural law is more like a prudential maxim, a means that we should embrace if we want to achieve our long-term goals. The first natural law, he tells us, is to seek peace. The second is to lay down our natural rights to do whatever we want to do so we can live with others peacefully. Now, Hobbes discusses many other natural laws as well, but these are the most important. Of course, the problem is that there's no way to enforce these natural laws without government. This is what Hobbes means when he says, actually, in the state of nature, there is no law and no justice. Of course, we could say if people just spontaneously got along, we could live in happy, tranquil, and non-coercive societies. We could experience peace without subjection. And this is really the hope of anarchist thinkers. Yet for Hobbes, peace can only be achieved if natural law is articulated and enforced by government, a sovereign with the power to strike fear in the hearts of every member of the community. This type of power is necessary in order to enforce the law, to push people to pursue their true rational interest. Now, Hobbes uses the biblical image of Leviathan, the unrivaled sea monster referred to in Job, the one who reigns over all children of pride. And the sovereign could be a single person or a group of people. Hobbes seems to prefer monarchy because he thinks that it would be more stable, but he does not rule out that the sovereign in his Leviathan could be a democracy or an aristocracy. What's important is that this sovereign should have near absolute power, the power to imprison and even put to death those who threaten the stability of the state. We as individuals authorize the state to act on our behalf to secure the stability of the political community. Yet once authorized, the sovereign is the only one who determines the ends needed to achieve the means of creating this stable regime. Now, it's important to note, however, that the natural right to protect ourselves is inalienable for Hobbes. Every member of the community retains this right. This is why Hobbes thinks that a prisoner has the right to fight back when the sovereign decides to put him to death. A soldier also can justly run away from battle. Now, this is a confusing point because Hobbes also believes that the individual has contracted with the sovereign and granted it the power to put him to death. So it seems that the prisoner and the soldier have a right at odds with the right of the sovereign. And here's another puzzle. Although Hobbes is very explicit about prohibiting rebellion against the sovereign, a subject has no right to resist the power of the sovereign if the sovereign is preserving his life, yet Hobbes seems to imply that if a sovereign fails to maintain peace and protect subjects, if a rebellion unsettles a regime, each individual must act for his own and her own self-preservation. So let's conclude with the beginning. The famous frontispiece. Hobbes commissioned the Parisian artist Abraham Boss to depict his teaching in this etching. We see a multitude gathered together to create the body politic. The artificial man, or sovereign, carries in one hand the sword representing earthly power, and in the other a bishop's staff, or crozier, representing spiritual power. The people collectively make up the sovereign and are looking up at him. The panels below each arm represent the instruments of earthly power, fortresses, cannons, and tools, and of spiritual power, churches and excommunication. These are the powers that the sovereign employs to ensure peaceful coexistence. Now, the Leviathan is so powerful, so awe-inspiring, that it's able to overcome the collective action problem, the problem of cooperation that destabilizes the state of nature. And it's through the sovereign power, Hobbes insists, that we can ultimately achieve our shared desire: peace.